Well, hello everyone, and welcome to my library. If you're new here, hello, my name is Chinzia, and if you're not new here and you're one of my lovely regulars, hi, how are you? I hope you're doing splendidly. So today we're going to be talking about book tropes. I think there's quite a few book tropes I could go through, but today we're talking about the whole enemies to lovers, subtext also rivals to lovers. So it kind of can get distinguished between the two. Now, most people when they talk about this subject talk about it in terms of YA. It's a big trope in YA books. Also, I'm told I'm obviously not a reader of YA, but I do watch quite a few YA videos here and there. And when I was thinking about it, it's not something that is only compelled to YA. And whilst on the surface it does seem like quite a unhealthy dynamic to promote into romance fiction in particular, or just in general in media fiction, as it were, there's many layers to it, and I've fallen prey to the trope here and there. So let's go through like a personal history of my interest in like love, like haters to lovers or enemies to lovers or rivals to lovers, because again we have dynamics. We have like obviously haters or enemies to lovers, and then we have rivals to lovers, and the stories go very differently. Obviously, if you have an enemy, we have someone who is someone that they dislike very intensely, versus a rival who is someone who tends to be like in the same field as them, but they are competition in some. Now, because I'm someone who doesn't read YA, I didn't think it was something that I was very attuned with, this concept, but I was thinking back on it when I was a teenager. It was very much my popular go-to trope, but I did so in manga and anime, so I would love the dynamic of the enemy to lover. And even in, you know, more adult content, as it were, but not in the adult content as you think it is, when we're talking about rom-coms, the enemies to or haters or rivals to lovers is a pretty substantial trope that goes back, and it's not just a modern thing. Obviously, we can go to the very classic Pride and Prejudice, when we have not really enemies, but clearly people who don't like each other to lovers. And I would probably hazard a guess that that was the book that made the trope more mainstream and popular, but it wasn't the origin of it. Like, we've had it all the way back into ancient texts, and also, again, ancient texts are very problematic when it comes to like haters and lovers and all that jazz, as my dog clearly can attest to. But even if we go back to Shakespeare, the most classic haters or enemies to lovers trope is Benedict and Beatrice in Much Ado About Nothing. You know, they are the classic and actually quite a healthy dynamic. I use that word lightly. We'll explore the healthy nature of this dynamic, but they're kind of the traditional and the healthiest presentation of just two people in a very comedic, I just don't like you, and they get convinced to fall in love with one another and realize that this hatred or dislike for one another was just sexual tension all masked up. But I've made a list of all the enemies to lovers that I've come across within different dynamics. I thought we'd break down the healthy nature of them. So I've obviously got Pride and Prejudice, but then we have Northanger Abbey as well. We had the Benedict and Beatrice from Much Ado About Nothing, Beauty and the Beast. And then, okay, so according to some scholars, also again, but this depends on how homo you want to read the text, in Gilgamesh and Enkidu, some people read them as lovers. They are very close friendship, and again, some people would argue that that is a dynamic that is representative of the enemies to lovers, but it depends on how you read the text. But then when we come to more modern day terminology, Hopper and Joyce, Stranger Things, classic, very 1980s, trope of enemies to lovers. In fact, the 1980s had a lot of it. Dirty Dancing, for example. Han Solo and Princess Leia. Harry and Sally from When Harry Met Sally. Sam Malone and Diane from Cheers. But then it trickled down into later media, you know, 10 Things I Hate About You, another classic film all about enemies to lovers. That probably, again, perpetuated the trope and made it very popular into YA literature today. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Buffy and Spike. One of my personal favourites, Evelyn and Richard in The Mummy, because they obviously start off as rivals, little bit trying to one-up one another, and then realise that they're madly in love, and then that fantastic kiss at the end. And most recently, it happened, but very poorly, in the Star Wars trilogy with Kylo Ren and Rey. Which we don't really want to talk about, do we? Because that was not done well. So as you can see from this array of like contemporary media, fiction and literature, it's still a very popular trope. Whilst it may be very, you know, prominent in the YA genre, it is not something that people are not interested in. It's still something that people are very much invested in. The dog is just stealing the limelight today. She just decided she wants to be star of the show. But before we get into the really juicy, problematic stuff, I'd actually like to thank today's sponsor, which is Dorian, because it's quite suitable for this topic. There are a lot of stories on Dorian, which focus around love-hate relationships. I'm liking the Lady of Vengeance story right now over on Dorian, which is by Jess. The love-hate relationship is stemming from a potential murder that happened in the past, and you are with this person that you fell for, but then they may be involved in a murder plot, or maybe the murderer themselves, and you're kind of caught in this dynamic of trying to find out the truth whilst also still having that love tension with the person. Lovers to haters kind of dynamic. If you love this kind of storyline, then you will definitely love Dorian. There are lots of stories on there, and you can also write your own stories. Dorian is a platform where you can write your own choose your own adventure stories in whatever genre that you're interested in, and it can give the reader far more autonomy than your traditional storytelling. You know, in a enemies to lovers, sometimes when we talk about the more problematic natures of this, you may find that the reactions of the protagonist in a love-hate relationship are very disempowering, and you can completely change that, not as a writer but also as a player on the games. When you're reading episodes, you can make more empowering choices that give more agency to the protagonist, and also kind of put characters in their place, and you can change the storyline as you go along as a player, and you can also stream and earn money from your streams and also from your stories. And it's a fantastic place to gain more traction to your writing if you are an aspiring author or writer of some way, getting a following and building a community around your writing, and also just joining in and having fun with other people. So if you're interested in building up an audience, a credibility as an author and writer, gaining attention to your stories, and then also actually earning money from your writing, either as a streamer or just purely as a story writer, then you should sign up for Dorian. I will leave the link down below. I stream on there on Fridays and Sundays. I'll be streaming on Sunday for 2 hours, so just tomorrow as this video goes up live. So if you want to join me, please. We kind of make it an online book club, in all honesty, whilst I read a story episode of my story, which is an Athena-inspired Bridgerton storyline, where again, I'm trying to do the concept of a healthy love triangle, because people say that love triangles in of themselves are not healthy. And they tend to present one character as much worse than the other when you're trying to steer the audience in a direction. I was like, what if all options are totally healthy and valid, and you just are genuinely having to pick between who you like the most at the end of the story? I just want to make it a more wholesome storyline, as well as some steamy content, obviously, at the end when we get through that. But thank you, Dorian, for sponsoring today's video. And now let's talk about what not to do when it comes to the enemies to lovers storyline. When it comes to the whole enemies to lovers, we have to ask ourselves, is this a healthy dynamic that people are or should be invested in and should aspire to be? There are many video essays which dissect the toxic nature of Hopper's relationship with Joyce in Stranger Things. A brilliant one here that I will obviously link down below. If you haven't seen it, but I think it's had millions of views, so you probably have. She's proper sitting in front of the camera, isn't she? People are going to be like, move the dog. It's not appropriate that she's the fact actually now giving this video. And to be all honest, I think she just rules the show herself. There we go. And if it's a toxic relationship trope that is being represented in fiction, particularly for young readers, is this healthy? Is it something that should be promoted? And why is it so endearing? Why is it so attractive? Well, actually, from a writing standpoint, it's a very useful trope to rely on. So let's break this down. Why is it so attractive to people? Obviously, it begs into the desire. If someone is reading into something and they want a romance to occur, there is no greater payoff than the transformation of someone not liking someone to loving them. In the same way of, you know, it works along the same lines as the unattractive person in school wants the popular boy to like them. That's another trope that happens, and it's such a good payoff when this dynamic that quote-unquote stereotypically shouldn't work does work and does pay off, and it ends up happily for people. Also, there's more elements to a transformation in an enemies to lovers romance, and that is the transformation of character. You go through a much greater change when you are enemies to lovers than into a traditional, like, popular boy and dork like myself in a high school. So with enemies to lovers, there tends to be, you know, a shift in perspectives, morality, a meeting in the middle. But where I think enemies to lovers gets a bad rap is when people take it a bit too far and then promote it as a healthy love dynamic. I'm looking at you, Wuthering Heights. The idea that that book is still, you know, romanticized and everyone refers to Heathcliff and Cathy as being a healthy relationship. I have no idea how that is still being accepted. But they fall in a very interesting category where they're like lovers to enemies and then enemies to lovers and then tragedy ensues. But again, that's an example of a very toxic lovers to enemies dynamic. The same as Sam and Diane in Cheers. I would argue that that's quite a toxic love-hate relationship dynamic it's quite aggressive and quite violent. Whereas something like Bridget Jones's Diary, which is obviously based on Pride and Prejudice, is reasonably harmless in comparison. They just don't like each other because they have like snooty attitudes of, you know, class distinction and richness, and she just feels like a total loser who can't hold down a job and she can't attract a man, and you have a posh upper middle class man who she just thinks is a snooty snob, and that's their dynamic, and that's more based on obviously Pride and Prejudice, but it's a healthier love dynamic in that there's no aggression between the two of them. It's not violent in any way, and that's where we get into the problematic nature of the love-hate relationship. So obviously, the idea of Stockholm syndrome, we're going back to Beauty and the Beast here, where you fall in love with your captor, or that kind of unhealthy dynamic, we don't really want to promote in contemporary media as a whole. It still is. People still romanticize Wuthering Heights to this day for reasons I just do not know why. It's still, I really enjoy Wuthering Heights, don't get me wrong. I loved how it was written, but I was so grateful that both the main characters die in the end. Sorry if that's a spoiler alert, but I was very happy to see them go. But where it can get wrong is when we start romanticizing toxic behaviors in literature, which is where I think a lot of people have issues with the enemies to lovers trope, particularly in YA, because they're presenting it to, obviously, a targeted younger audience, albeit obviously not all readers of YA are under the age of 18 and are not young adults in any shape or form, but they can still enjoy the fiction. There is no judgment of that. Oh, my dog just brought the ball to me. She wants me to throw it. I can't ignore that. Sorry. There you go, darling. I'm going to have to do this throughout the video now, aren't I? She's just the sweetest little bean. I can't ignore that face. Come on. Do you want to bring your ball onto the seat with me? Come on, bring it on. She's here to show you the ball. But as a writer in particular, the enemies to lovers serves as a perfect example of internal and external conflict, which is necessary for driving a plot forward. So again, writers lean into it. Where it can go very wrong is when they up the hatred level to an unhealthy, toxic degree, and dangerous behaviours are presented as it's okay, which leads into that trope of, you know, on a playground where a little boy pulls the hair and they tell the little girl, oh, he just does that because he has a crush on you. Not healthy stuff that we want to be teaching our children, that it's okay for people to physically hurt you in some way, and that's a demonstration of that's because they like you. And that actually stems from a misunderstanding of the enemies to lovers trope. It does not excuse unhealthy behaviour and mistreatment and verbal or physical or emotional abuse of a protagonist and their quote-unquote love interest. Though I am, you know, grateful in the fact that when I've done some research into reading about why people find the trope, you know, interesting, and if they actually admire this kind of trope or want it to emulate in their real life, most people in discussion forums in the field, because there's a lot of discussion forums on the enemies to lovers trope, and I went through it. Most people admitted that it's not something that they actually want to engage with in real life. It is purely a fantastical trope that they enjoy relating to, but they can see how toxic it would be in reality. I would argue that a lot of fictional relationships are not healthy. And, you know, I love the series of Stranger Things, but if I were to analyse Joyce and Hopper, who I adore together in my own weird, you know, investment in the series, at the same time, they are not a healthy couple in the slightest, and he is incredibly abusive towards her. He gaslights her constantly, he yells at her, he raises his voice against her, he doesn't believe her, he believes them, then he doesn't believe her. He's incredibly emotionally abusive, and he's also quite violent in her presence. This is not someone that I would encourage my friend to be with, but we're still encouraged to cheer them on and want them to be together as viewers of. We have to take things with a pinch of salt. Media is not always, and that means media and fiction in general, isn't going to be always representative of a healthy dynamic. It's just the awareness of where is the line? Are we meant to be rooting for this couple, or can we be critical of the writing? And as writers of, if you enjoy, you know, the trope of lovers to haters, can we as writers improve the trope by actually engaging in a healthier dynamic within it, whilst not eradicating the trope in itself, because people love the trope. We can't deny the audience for what they love and what they enjoy. I love Pride and Prejudice, I love Much Ado About Nothing. There are ways in which this trope can be employed that doesn't promote very dangerous behaviors as okay or as quote unquote redeemable, or a symbol of internalized, forbidden, oppressed love for the protagonist. So that's what I've been trying to do over on Dorian as well. I've just been trying to do healthier versions of love tropes that can be problematic. I think most people are accepting that the medium and the media are fictionalizations of an emotional dynamic, which just has a very high payoff at the end, and that's what readers of romance fiction are looking for. They want a high payoff. It is an extreme shift in dynamics, which has a huge payoff for the reader, emotionally, and who is invested in literature. And that is why it is a powerful tool and trope in fiction. But it is not always to be admired, and we are to be critical when it is employed, just because sometimes some authors can go a bit too far, and we have to question whether or not this is a healthy thing that we want to portray, particularly to younger readers, or just readers in general. So I hope you enjoyed this casual video on book tropes. I was thinking of going through some book tropes and exploring them in just a casual, chatty way. I'm obviously not scripting this, it's all off the top of my head, hence why there's no glasses on my face. I don't have to read anything from off screen, but that's probably also why I look quite weird, and that I can't see if the camera's still recording. That would be interesting to find out when I stand up, isn't it? But thank you so much for Dorian for sponsoring today's video. I will leave my link down below if you want to sign up. I'm streaming tomorrow night for 2 hours, so please join in with my online book club, as it were, when reading my little Athena storyline, which I'm really enjoying writing. So thank you for all the support recently. It's been a bit difficult, so I just want to say thank you for all your comments and love and support. They haven't gone unnoticed or unappreciated. I'm just a little bit quiet on social media at the moment because of things happening in life, so I genuinely appreciate all your support and kind words, and I will see you soon for another video. And remember, books save lives, so keep reading.